Major Emma Hawk Sinclair stepped out of the hangar at Edwards Air Force Base, the morning sun glinting off her flight suit, and the sleek, angular lines of the F-22 Raptors parked on the tarmac. The base was quiet, the kind of calm that always preceded chaos. She adjusted her flight gloves, running her fingers over the worn leather as if it could somehow prepare her for the day ahead. Today wasn't just another training sortie. She felt it in her chest, a low hum, a pulse that vibrated through her body, telling her that nothing routine was going to happen. The smell of jet fuel mixed with the crisp California air, and Emma took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. She could hear the faint chatter of other pilots prepping, engines revving in the distance, and the occasional metallic clang from the hangar. Her wingman, Captain Leo Shadow Hayes, approached, grinning like nothing in the world could touch him. "You nervous?" he teased, his voice bright, but she caught the edge of tension in his tone. Emma smirked, though her mind was already calculating angles, weather conditions, and emergency protocols. "Nope, just ready. You know me, the routine is boring anyway." Shadow chuckled, though his eyes lingered on her just a fraction too long. He knew she wasn't lying, but he also knew that routine in Emma's life was rarely routine. They climbed into their jets, the canopies locking with a satisfying click. The cockpit lights flickered on and the hum of systems filled the cabin. Emma's fingers danced over switches and screens, checking systems with meticulous precision. To anyone watching, it would have looked calm, almost serene, but inside her brain was a whirlwind of calculations. The mission was simple on paper, a joint exercise with multiple F-22 Raptors, testing formation flying and rapid interception protocols. But as she took off into the sky, the mountains glinting gold in the morning light below, she felt the subtle shift in the air. Something was off. Then the alert came in, sharp and immediate. The communications tower crackled. "Mayday, civilian aircraft losing power, descending rapidly. Emergency response teams en route." Emma froze for a split second, enough for the adrenaline to spike, before her instincts took over. She switched channels, her voice calm, controlled, almost soothing. "This is Major Sinclair. I'm on approach. Give me coordinates and current altitude." The F-22 formation followed her lead instinctively, maintaining their positions as the civilian plane appeared on the radar, a small dot spiraling downward over the jagged mountains. Emma's stomach tightened. She knew that the terrain below was unforgiving. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and dozens of lives could be lost in seconds. The plane's altitude was dangerously low. Smoke began to streak the radar readouts. The engine was failing. Emma's eyes flicked across the instruments, scanning wind speeds, angle of descent, and terrain maps. She had seconds, maybe 30, 40 tops, to make a decision. "Passengers are screaming," Shadow muttered over comms. "This is going to be ugly." Emma didn't answer. She never panicked, not when lives depended on precision. Her mind went back years, to the early days of her training, hours in simulators that mimicked impossible scenarios, drills where a fraction of a second could mean success or death. She had trained for this, though she had never imagined it would happen in real life. The civilian plane twisted dangerously, caught in a downdraft that threatened to smash it against a rocky ridge. Emma adjusted her own jet's position, hovering above the plane like a hawk circling prey. Her calmness belied the tension she felt in every muscle, every fiber of her being. She studied the angle, the descent speed, calculating an approach that most pilots would have called suicidal. "Major Sinclair," another pilot called, voice trembling slightly, "the terrain, it's too narrow. You can't." Emma's eyes didn't leave the plane. She could see passengers pressed to their seats, some crying, some gripping the armrests so tightly their knuckles were white. But she couldn't see the fear, only the opportunity to act to save them. She knew the risks. She had trained for years for these moments in secret under classified programs where every move was pushed to the limit. Her fingers moved over the controls with precise, fluid motions, each adjustment countering turbulence, wind shear, and failing systems. She leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the approaching valley, her heart hammering in time with the plane's descent. Seconds stretched. The mountains loomed closer. A gust of wind buffeted the civilian plane, making it tilt violently. Passengers screamed, and the cabin shook. Emma countered instantly, banking her F-22 to compensate for the shifting air, positioning herself just above the civilian aircraft so she could guide it through the narrow pass. "Steady," she whispered under her breath, though she knew the plane couldn't hear her. Her mind worked in overdrive, mapping trajectories, calculating altitudes, angles of banking, and emergency landing zones that didn't exist on any map. Shadow's voice cut through the comms again, tighter now. "I've never seen anyone fly like this, even in simulations. She's insane." Emma didn't respond. Insane was irrelevant, precision mattered, timing mattered, life and death mattered. Then, out of nowhere, the unexpected happened. On the radar, a small blip appeared too fast, moving erratically, almost impossible to track. Emma noticed it instantly. It wasn't part of the civilian plane, and it wasn't part of their formation. Her pulse quickened. "Major, what is that?" Shadow asked, tension dripping from his voice. Emma's jaw tightened. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the radar and then the sky. The blip moved closer, and suddenly she realized this wasn't just an emergency landing anymore. There was a second, unknown variable that could ruin everything. The civilian plane tilted dangerously, veering slightly off course. Emma's hands moved instinctively over the controls, making split-second corrections. She guided it just a few inches away from the jagged cliff edge, her stomach twisting with every heartbeat. The passengers screamed louder, some clutching each other in terror. And then the radio crackled again, this time with an alert that froze her in place for a heartbeat. "Warning, unknown aerial object approaching. Coordinates intersect with civilian aircraft. Immediate evasive action advised." Emma's eyes locked on the approaching blip. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Every training exercise, every drill, every late-night simulator session came rushing back. She had trained for moments like this, but never together: engine failure, narrow mountain pass, high winds, and now, an unknown object barreling toward the plane. Her voice came out calm, steady, but inside her mind raced. "All units maintain formation. I've got this. Brace for possible collision." The F-22 pilots exchanged anxious glances. They had trained for emergency maneuvers, dogfights, and high-speed intercepts. But what Emma was doing right now, guiding a failing civilian plane through impossible terrain while an unknown blip appeared on radar, it was something beyond their comprehension. Emma's gaze flicked to the passengers one more time. She could see the terror, the confusion, the fear of impending doom. And she knew that if she failed, they would die. But she couldn't fail. Not today, not on her watch. Then, as the plane tilted dangerously into the gusting wind, Emma whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "Hold on, just hold on." The F-22 pilots watched in tense silence, the hum of their engines the only sound as Emma maneuvered with a precision that seemed unreal, defying gravity, air currents, and the limits of human reaction. And just as the cliff loomed closer than ever, the unknown blip surged suddenly on the radar, faster, closer, unpredictable, leaving everyone wondering. Was this just another variable in a training exercise? Or was it something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? The civilian aircraft shuddered violently as the downdraft ripped through the valley, throwing it perilously close to the jagged cliffs. Inside, passengers screamed, gripping seats, armrests, or each other, some whispering frantic prayers. The cockpit was chaos incarnate, with the co-pilot shouting numbers and systems failing around them. But outside, in the skis above, Major Emma Hawk Sinclair was in absolute control, a ghost of calm in a storm of panic. She hovered her F-22 slightly above and behind the failing plane, her eyes scanning the horizon, the instruments, the winds, and the mountain pass. Her fingers danced over switches and dials, fine-tuning every adjustment. Every calculation she made had to be precise. One tiny misstep would send the plane into a wall of rock or pitch it into the icy river below. She had seconds, and those seconds would decide lives. Shadow's voice cut through the comms, barely audible over the roar of the engines. "Emma, that pass, it's impossible. You can't make it. Not with those wind speeds, not with the engines failing." Emma didn't answer. She never argued in the air. She let her actions speak. She leaned slightly into the control stick, banking the plane with a precision honed from years of secret Top Gun-level training. Every tilt, every correction, every minute adjustment countered the turbulence, keeping the aircraft stable enough for passengers to survive. The co-pilot, pale and shaking, looked at her in disbelief. How are you doing this?" Emma didn't respond. Her focus was total. Her mind was moving at a speed that no ordinary human could comprehend, calculating altitudes, angles of descent, wind currents, and thrust adjustments in a single, continuous mental loop. The valley narrowed. The walls seemed to close in with every passing second, jagged and merciless. Trees flailed past the windows, a blur of green and brown. Rocks jutted out from cliffsides like teeth ready to tear the plane apart. Passengers screamed again, some hitting the overhead compartments, others covering their faces. Emma's jaw tightened. She could hear the F-22 pilots coordinating above her, but even they were struggling to follow her maneuvers. She banked hard, guiding the plane through a split in the mountains barely wide enough for it to pass, the nose scraping dangerously close to jagged rock. Sparks flew as debris from the cliff struck the fuselage. Shadow's voice returned, tense and almost breathless. "You're defying physics. I don't know how you're still in the air." Emma's eyes flicked to the radar. The unknown blip from before was still there, moving erratically, faster than anything conventional aircraft should move. She couldn't focus on it yet. Right now, the passengers' lives depended on the mountain pass. But the presence of the blip added an extra layer of danger, a wild card in a scenario already teetering on the edge of disaster. Inside the cockpit of the civilian plane, the co-pilot was struggling to keep control, fear written across his face. I can't stabilize her," he shouted. Emma leaned over the comms. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, a lifeline in the storm of terror. "Listen to me. You're going to follow my guidance. Bank slightly left. Hold your nose steady. Trust me." He hesitated, eyes wide with panic, but then nodded. Emma's calm authority was magnetic, compelling even in the face of imminent death. Slowly, the plane responded, shifting just enough to avoid the cliff edge. But the storm of wind and turbulence showed no mercy. A sudden gust slammed into the plane from the side, tilting it dangerously. The fuselage groaned under the strain and Emma's heart pounded. She countered immediately, flipping the controls, adjusting thrust, banking, lifting, her every move a lifeline for everyone below. From above, the F-22 pilots watched in disbelief. They had trained for high-speed intercepts, evasive maneuvers, dogfights, even emergency rescues in simulations. But nothing could have prepared them for this. Emma was performing maneuvers so precise, so impossible, that it seemed almost superhuman. Shadow couldn't contain his awe. "Major, you're insane. Only someone with Top Gun instincts could pull this off." Emma allowed herself a split second of focus on that thought, but she pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time to think about her training or her reputation. Lives were at stake. She scanned the instruments again. The engines were failing. The landing gear would never deploy properly in this narrow pass. She had to improvise. Her eyes caught a narrow plateau just ahead, a strip of rock barely wider than the plane's wingspan. It was the only place she could stabilize the aircraft. The winds howled around her, turbulence thrashing the fuselage like a toy in a storm. But she didn't hesitate. She guided the plane toward the plateau, her hands steady despite the chaos. The passengers had no idea what was happening. Some prayed, some screamed. Some were frozen, staring out the windows at the looming rocks and cliffs. Emma's calm, controlled movements were invisible to them, but she was their invisible guardian, the line between life and death. Then from the radar, the unknown blip surged closer, faster than anything imaginable. Emma noticed it just in time. It was closing in on the plane from above, erratically, like a predator. She cursed under her breath. There wasn't time to deal with this now. She had to get the plane through the mountain pass first, or no one would survive to face the new threat. The plateau approached. Emma guided the plane over the edge, scraping the wings against jagged rocks, sending sparks flying. Passengers screamed, some clutching each other so tightly it seemed they might crush bones. But slowly, miraculously, the plane stabilized on the narrow strip of rock. Emma exhaled sharply, but there was no time to celebrate. She knew the unknown blip was still out there, and whatever it wasn't going to wait patiently while she orchestrated this emergency landing. Shadow's voice crackled again, this time with fear and awe mixing in equal measure. "Major, what the hell was that? There's something else up here. It's moving too fast, I can't." Emma's eyes narrowed. She had seen it too. The object, moving faster than any known aircraft, zigzagging unpredictably. It was intelligent in its movements, almost calculating, like it was studying her actions. She clenched her jaw, her hands gripping the controls tightly. "Not now," she whispered, almost to herself. "We survive first, everything else later." The passengers were still panicked, but the plane was finally stable, teetering, trembling, but airborne. Emma kept her hands on the controls, ready to counter the next gust, the next obstacle, the next unknown. And then, just as she began to assess the next move, a loud alarm blared from the co-pilot's console. Smoke was rising from the engine compartment. Sparks flickered. The fuselage groaned again. Emma's pulse raced, adrenaline flooding every nerve. She had saved the plane from the cliffs, but the fight wasn't over. The mountain pass had been conquered, but now the aircraft itself seemed determined to fall apart. Her gaze flicked to the radar, and the unknown blip was closer than ever. Faster, unpredictable, closing in on the plane. Her jaw set, her hands tightened on the controls. Her voice, calm but commanding, cut through the comms again. "All units stay focused. This is far from over, hold on." And in that instant, the passengers, the F-22 pilots, and even the co-pilot realized something terrifying. They had survived the mountain pass, but the worst was yet to come. Emma Sinclair's eyes scanned the cockpit instruments, every gauge, every blinking light a potential death sentence if misread. The civilian aircraft was stable, for now teetering on the thin plateau of rock she had fought to reach, but the engine smoke curling up into the cabin told a grim story. They weren't out of danger. Each second the plane remained airborne felt like an eternity. The passengers, huddled in their seats, were still shaking violently. One young mother clutched her infant to her chest, whispering prayers under trembling breath. Another man pounded at his seatbelt, panic etched across his face, while an elderly couple held hands tightly, eyes wide with terror. None of them could see Emma's calculated maneuvers, but they could feel the tension vibrating through the cabin, through every shudder of the failing aircraft. Emma adjusted the controls, banking the plane ever so slightly to counter the increasing turbulence. Wind whipped through the mountain pass, threatening to push them off course. She leaned into the joystick, muscles taut, her mind working faster than a supercomputer. Every move was instinctual, a blend of experience and training she had kept secret from the world. She had learned to react to impossibilities, to bend physics to her will, but even she knew this was pushing human limits. "Emma, that engine is critical," Shadow's voice came over comms, his tone tight. "If it fails completely, we lose her. We lose everyone on board. You need to make a decision now." Emma didn't flinch. She allowed her eyes to briefly flick toward the radar. The mysterious blip that had appeared before, faster, erratic, and unpredictable, was now dangerously close to the civilian plane. Its movements suggested intelligence, like it was calculating every maneuver she made. She swallowed hard but didn't panic. She had trained for moments like this, though never with a literal unknown in the sky as a threat. The co-pilot was pale, sweat streaking his face, hands trembling on the controls. I can't keep her level. She's too heavy on one side, the flaps won't. Emma leaned forward, placing a firm hand on his arm. Listen to me. Follow my instructions. 1 degree left. Increase throttle gently. Trust me. The man hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes, but he obeyed. Slowly, painstakingly, the plane shifted back into alignment. Sparks flew from scraping rock below, and a loud metallic groan echoed through the fuselage, but the plane remained airborne. From above, the F-22 pilots could hardly comprehend what they were witnessing. They had trained for life-or-death emergencies, but Emma's skill was unlike anything they had seen. She was weaving through impossible terrain, stabilizing a failing aircraft with a rogue, unidentified threat approaching, and doing it with a calmness that defied logic. Shadow muttered under his breath, almost to himself, I don't even know how she's alive right now. Emma's eyes flicked briefly to the radar again. The blip was closing in fast, its trajectory aimed directly at the civilian plane. She cursed softly. That thing had to be dealt with eventually, but right now, the lives inside the plane came first. Her mind raced, calculating angles, predicting the movements of both the plane and the blip, creating a mental map that only she could navigate. The plateau was too short to land, and the engine could fail at any second. Emma realized that her only option was to guide the aircraft through a series of controlled maneuvers, banking, adjusting, descending in precise increments, that would slow its descent without losing momentum or stability. She spoke into the comms again, her voice firm and controlled. Passengers, listen. We're going to navigate this mountain pass together. Stay calm, stay in your seats, and brace for turbulence. We will get through this. Trust me. Inside the plane, fear rippled through the cabin. Some passengers obeyed, clutching seatbelts and closing their eyes. Others whispered frantic prayers. A teenage boy, tears streaking his cheeks, held onto his sister. We're going to die, he murmured. Emma's jaw tightened. No, not today, she whispered under her breath. Every second counted. Every movement had to be perfect. The plane jolted violently as another gust of wind slammed it sideways. Emma countered immediately, banking hard to compensate. The fuselage groaned, metal scraping against rocks below. Sparks erupted along the edges of the wings as they clipped protruding stone. The passengers screamed again, their cries merging into a single, continuous sound of terror. From above, the F-22 pilots called out warnings, trying to help coordinate her approach, but Emma's focus was singular. She was guiding this plane with a precision that made their instructions almost irrelevant. She could see the narrow pathway through the mountains ahead, barely wide enough for the plane to pass. A miscalculation of a single degree, a fraction of an inch, and the aircraft would crash. The co-pilot's hands shook visibly. I can't do it, he gasped. Emma's gaze snapped to him, icy and commanding. Yes, you can. Follow my instructions. 1 degree right, hold steady, trust me. We survive together. He nodded shakily, and the plane responded, slowly sliding into alignment with the mountain pass. Sparks flew as the wings scraped rock again, but they were moving, inch by inch, toward safety. Then came a sudden, violent jolt, stronger than anything before. The plane lurched, the fuselage twisting under stress. A sharp alarm screamed through the cockpit, engine temperature critical. Smoke billowed from the port side. Emma's heart hammered, but her mind went into overdrive. Steady, she whispered, steady. The radar blip darted closer, unpredictable, almost taunting. It had been silent for the moment, but now it moved with intent, closing the distance. Emma realized that this wasn't just an unknown object. It was actively tracking the aircraft, anticipating movements, forcing her to account for a variable she could not yet neutralize. She adjusted the plane slightly left, banking with perfect timing, and the fuselage shuddered under the stress. Sparks rained down from scraping rocks. The passengers' screams escalated, some praying, others fainting. Emma's stomach twisted as she guided the plane through another narrow passage, calculating every inch, every gust of wind, every fraction of engine power. Shadow's voice came over the comms, tense and incredulous. "Emma, you're insane. You're doing the impossible." Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind was a web of calculations, every movement intertwined with survival, every second a knife edge between life and death. Another gust slammed into the plane, violently throwing it sideways. Sparks erupted, fuselage groaning like it might tear apart at any second. Emma countered, banking hard, adjusting thrust, her fingers a blur on the controls. The plane responded barely, inching forward along the treacherous pathway. And then in the peripheral radar, the blip surged again, zigzagging as if testing her reactions. It was faster than anything human-made, unpredictable, intelligent. Emma's pulse spiked. She realized that even if she saved the passengers from the mountains, this blip could still end everything. Her lips pressed into a thin line. One thought crystallized in her mind. She had survived impossible scenarios before, but this was beyond anything she had ever encountered. She had no choice. She had to adapt, improvise, and act with instincts that had been forged in the most extreme training programs in the world. Her voice over the comms was calm, precise. "All units hold formation. Focus on the aircraft. Stay alert. We may not have a second chance." The passengers, still screaming and crying, were unaware of the additional danger, but they felt the tension, the trembling that ran through the cabin. Every movement of the plane was like walking a tightrope over a chasm, and every second was a gamble with death. Emma's eyes flicked to the radar again. The blip was now almost directly above the plane, its erratic movements closing in. Sparks flew from scraping rocks. The fuselage shuddered. Engine smoke thickened, curling into the cockpit. Emma's hands tightened on the controls. Her mind raced. She had survived every impossible scenario she had ever faced, but this combination of failing aircraft, treacherous terrain, and a mysterious, intelligent blip, was a test unlike any before. She whispered under her breath, "Hold on, just hold on." And as the plane twisted violently, scraping rocks once more, and the blip darted closer, the F-22 pilots realized with dawning horror. They were witnessing something no one had ever seen before, a human being defying death itself. The air inside the civilian aircraft was a maelstrom of chaos. Screams mingled with the shrill alarms of failing systems, the groan of stressed fuselage, and the occasional metallic ping of sparks striking the cabin. The passengers were white-faced, gripping seats, armrests, or each other as if sheer panic could somehow anchor them against the unforgiving forces pressing from all sides. The plane shuddered violently, rocking as wind whipped through the narrow mountain pass like a living predator. Major Emma Hawk Sinclair's eyes were locked on the instruments, her mind running calculations faster than any computer on base. Every ounce of her training, every simulator drill, every late-night Top Gun-inspired exercise she had endured flashed through her mind in rapid succession. She had faced impossible odds before, but never quite like this. A failing aircraft, turbulent winds, a dangerously narrow mountain pass, and a mysterious blip closing in from above like a predator stalking its prey. "Emma, we're too close to the cliff," the co-pilot gasped, his voice trembling. "We're going to—" "Not today," Emma interrupted, voice firm, commanding, calm as if sheer force of will could bend reality itself. Her hands moved over the controls with deadly precision, banking the aircraft, adjusting thrust, fine-tuning every minor movement to counter the turbulence. Sparks erupted as the plane scraped along jagged rocks, metal whining under the strain. The passengers shrieked, but for the first time someone's voice, the calm, authoritative one of Emma Sinclair, cut through their panic, offering a lifeline. "Brace yourselves," she commanded. "We're navigating through this together." The co-pilot obeyed, adjusting with careful hesitation, while Emma guided them inch by inch through the treacherous corridor of rock and wind. One wrong move could send the plane tumbling into the valley below. The mountain walls loomed on both sides, jagged, merciless, like the teeth of some ancient beast. From above, the F-22 pilots watched in stunned silence. Shadow muttered under his breath, disbelief laced with fear. "I've trained for every scenario, everything, and nothing prepares you for this. She's unreal." Emma ignored the commentary. Her focus was singular: stabilize the plane, save the passengers, survive the impossible. She felt the plane tilt dangerously, one wing dipping toward the cliffside. Sparks flew, scraping metal, singing against rock. The fuselage groaned, threatening to fracture. "Hold steady, steady," she muttered under her breath, voice low, almost a mantra. She leaned into the controls, muscles taut, instincts razor-sharp. The plane responded miraculously, inching forward through the narrowing pass. The co-pilot's face was pale, sweat streaking his forehead. I can't do this, it's impossible." Emma's gaze snapped to him, icy and commanding. "You can, follow my lead. 1 degree left, hold steady, we survive together." The man's hands shook violently, but he obeyed. Slowly, the plane shifted, correcting its path just enough to avoid the cliff edge. Sparks flew again as the wings scraped stone. Then came the gust, a wall of wind so powerful it slammed the plane sideways, rattling everything inside. The fuselage groaned ominously and the engine groaned under stress. Smoke thickened, curling into the cockpit. Passengers screamed anew, some clutching each other, some banging desperately on the walls. Emma countered immediately, banking hard, adjusting thrust, feeling every vibration and tremor as though the plane were an extension of her own body. Every calculation, every maneuver, had to be perfect. One misstep, and they would all plunge into the jagged rocks below. The radar blip from before darted closer, zigzagging unpredictably, intelligent in its movements. Emma's pulse surged. She realized that while she was focusing on the immediate threat, the terrain, the failing engines, and the passengers' panicked reactions, this object was watching, calculating, and closing in. Her voice over the comms cut through the chaos, precise and commanding. "All units focus on the aircraft. Stay alert. I may have a second threat incoming. Be ready." The F-22 pilots exchanged tense glances. Even seasoned veterans couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what Emma was doing. They had witnessed incredible aerial feats, high-speed intercepts, and emergency maneuvers. But nothing, not a single simulation, not a single training session, could prepare them for this. Emma's mind raced. The plateau ahead, the only landing area, was perilously narrow. The engines could fail at any moment. Sparks erupted again as the wings scraped rock. The fuselage shook violently. The passengers' screams reached a crescendo. She knew she had seconds, maybe less, to act. Every fiber of her being focused, every instinct honed over years of secret elite training surged forward. She adjusted thrust, banking the plane, maneuvering the controls as though she could manipulate the air itself. Inch by inch, she guided the aircraft along the jagged terrain. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared from the co-pilot's console, engine temperature critical. Smoke spiraled higher and the smell of burning metal filled the cabin. Emma's jaw tightened. This was no longer about precision. This was about survival. "Passengers," she called, voice loud, commanding, cutting through the panic. "Brace for turbulence. Hold onto your seats." The plane lurched violently, almost tipping over the edge of the plateau. Emma countered, banking hard, adjusting thrust to keep it from toppling into the valley. Sparks rained down, windows rattled. Passengers screamed, some fainted, some clutched each other desperately. From above, Shadow and the other pilots watched, jaws tight, hearts pounding. They had never seen anything like it. A human being maneuvering a failing aircraft through impossible terrain with a level of skill that seemed superhuman. The blip surged again, zigzagging toward the plane. Emma's pulse spiked. She realized with horror that even if she navigated the mountain pass, this unknown entity could strike at any moment. She gritted her teeth. Her hands tightened on the controls. Her mind focused entirely on the immediate task, the survival of the passengers. She whispered under her breath, "Hold on, just hold on." The plane tilted violently again, scraping rocks, metal groaning under the strain. Sparks exploded along the wings. She adjusted the plane just enough to stabilize it. The passengers clung to their seats, screaming and crying. Emma's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the panic like a lifeline. She calculated the next maneuver. The plane needed a slight ascent to clear the rocks, but the engine was on the verge of failing. She pushed it, feeling every vibration, every shudder, every heartbeat. Inch by inch, she lifted the plane, narrowly avoiding the jagged peaks around her. From above, Shadow's voice trembled. "Emma, this is insane. You're defying everything, physics, probability, every rule. I don't know how you're still flying." Emma didn't answer. She couldn't. She was threading a needle between life and death, and any distraction could cost everyone aboard. The unknown blip darted closer, closing in with alarming speed. Sparks flew, the fuselage groaned. Emma realized she was running out of time. One more gust, one more miscalculation, and they would all fall into the valley below. Her eyes narrowed, focus absolute. She guided the plane through one final, harrowing set of maneuvers, banking hard, adjusting thrust, holding it steady. And for the first time, she felt a small, fleeting sense of control. But the blip was still there, still closing. Its movements were deliberate, calculated, unpredictable. It was intelligent, watching her, waiting. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. The passengers were still screaming, still panicked, still clinging to life. She knew that even if she survived this immediate threat, the danger was far from over. The mountain pass was behind them for now. The plateau had been negotiated, the plane had survived. But the unknown blip, moving faster than anything human or mechanical should, hovered ominously above them, closing in. Emma whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "Hold on just a little longer." And as the plane shuddered violently, sparks flying from scraping rocks, engines straining, the passengers crying in terror, the F-22 pilots realized in stunned silence. They were witnessing someone who could turn the impossible into survival, but the next seconds might finally push her beyond human limits. The civilian plane shuddered violently as it emerged from the mountain pass, sparks still raining from its wings. Smoke curled from the port engine, thick and acrid, stinging the eyes of the passengers. Their cries had escalated into a continuous chorus of fear, some moaning, some screaming, some gripping their seats as though sheer panic could hold them aloft. Emma Sinclair, Major Hawk of the Air Force, had maneuvered them through the impossible. She allowed herself a single heartbeat to register relief, but there was no time to exhale. Ahead lay the final challenge, a narrow plateau barely wide enough to stabilize the aircraft. One miscalculation could send them tumbling into the jagged valley below. Emma's hands tightened on the controls, fingers pressing and twisting with precise micro-adjustments. The fuselage groaned as the plane scraped against the rocks again, sparks showering down like meteor fragments. The passengers were thrown violently against their seats, some hitting the ceiling with muffled cries. "Brace for landing," Emma called over the intercom, her voice calm and commanding despite the chaos. The co-pilot's knuckles were white as he followed her directions, fumbling with the controls, sweat pouring down his face. She guided the plane in a series of delicate maneuvers, banking, adjusting throttle, shifting weight, inch by agonizing inch toward the narrow strip of rock. The wind screamed through the pass like a living predator, buffeting the fuselage. Emma countered, pushing the engines as far as they could go without total failure. Sparks and smoke cascaded around the cockpit, but she remained steady, almost eerily calm. Every movement was calculated, every second critical. From above, the F-22 pilots watched in tense awe. Shadow's voice broke through comms, almost trembling. "I've flown with the best of the best, Emma, but this is beyond anything I've ever seen. How are you still holding it together?" Emma didn't respond. Focus was all that mattered. She guided the plane over a jagged edge of rock, wings scraping the stone. The fuselage shuddered violently. Sparks erupted as metal screeched against rock. The passengers screamed again, their faces pressed to the seatbacks. Some clutched each other in terror, some silently prayed, eyes wide and unblinking. Emma banked sharply, countering the wind, her hands a blur across the controls. She could feel the fuselage flex, hear it groan, see the smoke curling from the failing engine. One wrong adjustment now would mean death. One fraction too much throttle, one miscalculated degree, and they would tumble into the valley. "Hold steady," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Her mind raced, calculating thrust, angle, wind speed, and terrain, simultaneously anticipating every move of the erratic blip still circling above them. The plateau was almost beneath them. Emma calculated her descent, maneuvering the plane to land with surgical precision. She could feel the heat from the engines, smell the acrid smoke, taste the tension that saturated the cabin. Sparks shot from scraping rocks as the landing gear finally made contact, a hair's breadth from disaster. The plane shuddered violently as the tires hit the rocky surface. The fuselage scraped along jagged stone, metal whining in protest, sparks showering the passengers. Emma fought to keep the plane straight, guiding it along the narrow strip. The co-pilot's face was pale, fear etched in every line, yet he followed her lead, adjusting throttle and rudder as she instructed. Slowly, agonizingly, the aircraft stabilized. The fuselage trembled, the engines hissed, and smoke spiraled into the cockpit. But for the first time, they were no longer at risk of plunging into the valley below. Inside, the passengers erupted into a mix of sobs, gasps, and disbelief. Some clung to each other, tears streaming. Some whispered prayers of gratitude. Emma finally allowed herself a short exhale, wiping sweat from her brow. She had done the impossible, saved everyone from a disaster that seemed inevitable just moments ago. But above them, the F-22 pilots were still processing what they had witnessed. Shadow hovered nearby, his jaw tight, eyes wide. I've never, who is she?" he muttered under his breath. One of the other pilots pulled up her service record on the tablet. As the data loaded, their eyes widened in shock. Every maneuver she had executed aligned perfectly with Top Gun-level drills, extreme precision, high-risk scenarios, advanced evasive techniques, and complex stabilizations. She hadn't just survived. She had executed textbook-perfect maneuvers under the most extreme conditions imaginable. "She's Top Gun trained," Shadow whispered incredulously. "But why didn't anyone know?" Emma didn't answer. She climbed out of the cockpit, sweat streaking her face, uniform scorched but intact. The passengers stared at her, wide-eyed, shaking and sobbing, and a few managed to whisper thanks, though words failed most. She offered them a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now," she said, voice quiet but firm. "You're safe." Her gaze flicked to the plateau's edge, where jagged rocks jutted into the air like teeth. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. Every training drill, every late-night simulation, every secret exercise had led to this moment. She had turned impossible odds into survival, but even as relief began to wash over her, she knew the danger wasn't fully gone. The radar still showed the blip, moving faster now, erratic, almost like it was testing them, observing, calculating. Emma's jaw tightened. It had not yet revealed its intentions, and she sensed instinctively that it wouldn't wait quietly. The F-22 pilots gathered around, unable to speak at first, stunned by the display of skill, nerve, and precision. One finally asked, voice trembling. How did you do that? That was unreal." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. She only turned back to her Raptor, checking its systems, running diagnostics, preparing for whatever came next. She didn't need to explain herself. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. But in the distance, the radar pinged again. The blip had moved closer, its trajectory no longer random. It was deliberate, almost menacing. Emma's pulse quickened. She knew instinctively that while the passengers were safe, the next threat, whatever this blip represented, could undo everything she had just accomplished. The F-22 pilots exchanged worried glances. They had just witnessed a miracle, but they also realized they were witnessing something else, a legend in the making. A pilot whose skill, courage, and composure had saved over 100 lives under impossible conditions. A pilot who had hidden the depth of her training from everyone, until now. Emma ran her hand across the control panel, eyes narrowing at the radar. Sparks still floated from the fuselage, smoke curled from the engine, and the unknown object drew nearer. The valley was silent now, eerily so, the passengers trembling and leaning on each other, unsure whether to cry or pray. Her voice came again over the comms, calm but firm. "Everyone, stay alert. We've survived the first challenge, but the day isn't over. Prepare yourselves." The F-22 pilots understood instantly. She wasn't just a pilot. She was something else entirely. Top Gun training, extreme instinct, split-second calculation. She had just turned disaster into salvation. But whatever this blip was, it was about to test her again. Emma's gaze locked on the approaching anomaly. Her fingers twitched over the controls. She whispered under her breath, almost like a promise. "Not today, not on my watch." And in that moment, the blip surged closer, faster than anything they had ever seen, closing in on the civilian plane with terrifying intent. The impossible landing was complete, but the real danger had only just begun. Emma Sinclair's eyes never left the approaching anomaly. The radar blip, once a distant dot, was now a roiling threat, moving with a speed and intelligence that defied explanation. It zigzagged unpredictably, almost as if it were studying her maneuvers, calculating every split-second decision she had just executed. Even the F-22 pilots hovering above her could only watch in stunned silence, their training and experience unable to fully account for what they were witnessing. Shadow's voice broke through the comms, tense and incredulous. "Emma, what the hell is that thing? It's not an aircraft. Nothing we know moves like that." Emma's jaw tightened. She didn't have time to answer. Every instinct, every ounce of her elite training screamed at her that this was no ordinary threat. She leaned into the controls, banking her Raptor to gain altitude, her eyes flicking to the civilian aircraft safely parked on the plateau below. The passengers were dazed, some crying, some trembling, some silently staring out the windows at the clearing sky, unaware of the new danger looming above. She switched channels to the co-pilot. "Stay with me, keep the aircraft stable, we're not done yet." The co-pilot nodded weakly, still pale from the previous ordeal. I'm trying," he murmured, hands shaking on the controls. Emma allowed herself a brief moment to assess the situation. The anomaly's movements were deliberate. It was fast, calculated, intelligent. She realized instinctively that it was testing them, probing for weaknesses, gauging reaction times, pushing limits just as she had pushed the plane through impossible terrain. Her pulse surged. She knew she couldn't ignore it. She had just saved over 100 lives from a catastrophic mountain pass, but if she didn't neutralize this threat, those lives and many more were still in danger. Shadow and the other F-22 pilots hovered close, circling her with a combination of awe and apprehension. They had trained for combat, high-speed intercepts, emergency response, but they had never faced anything like this. Emma's movements were deliberate, precise, almost superhuman in their timing and control. Her history, her hidden Top Gun level training, was now becoming painfully obvious. Emma muttered under her breath, almost to herself. All right, let's see what you're really made of. She guided her raptor upward, eyes locked on the anomaly. Every maneuver, every adjustment was calculated to test the object's behavior while keeping the civilian plane safe. The unknown blip surged in response, its speed increasing dramatically, tracking her movements with alarming precision. Shadow's voice cut through again. Emma, you're insane. You're going to. I know, she interrupted, voice firm, calm, but edged with steel. Just stay focused. The anomaly's approach was rapid, almost impossible to track with the naked eye. Emma relied on her training, decades of emergency maneuvers, split-second calculations, and simulated high-risk scenarios. She banked sharply, adjusted thrust, performed a series of rapid altitude changes, and watched as the blip mirrored her movements perfectly, responding with unnerving intelligence. The F-22 pilots exchanged tense glances. Shadow's jaw was tight. She's controlling it somehow. She's predicting its moves before it even makes them. Emma's mind raced. She realized the anomaly was not random. It was intelligent, likely mechanical, and highly advanced. It wasn't just a threat. It was a test, a challenge, a puzzle that required not brute force but skill, precision, and intuition to solve. And no one alive except her could meet this challenge. Her fingers danced over the controls with near-perfect synchronicity. She banked left, then right, ascended, dove, adjusted throttle, banking angles, and wing tilt. The blip responded in kind, its movements erratic but calculated, mirroring her in a deadly game of aerial chess. Suddenly, the F-22 pilot's monitors picked up a pattern. Shadow leaned over one of the screens, pointing at the trajectory lines. Look at that. Every move she makes, it reacts instantly, almost like it's been designed to counter only someone with her skill set. Emma's eyes narrowed. She had trained for decades, often in secret, under elite programs that honed reflexes beyond normal human limits. Top Gun-level drills, extreme emergency simulations, high-risk aerial maneuvers, all of it had prepared her for moments like this. The anomaly wasn't just a threat. It was a mirror, reflecting her skill back at her. She allowed herself a faint, grim smile. Then let's see if it can match the real thing, she muttered under her breath. The blip surged closer, and Emma executed a rapid barrel roll, narrowly avoiding collision. The F-22 pilots gasped. Shadow's voice cracked with disbelief. I've never seen anyone do that in real life. It's insane. Emma didn't answer. She continued her maneuvers, alternating between aggressive, evasive actions and precise, calculated positioning, drawing the anomaly into patterns she controlled. It was a dangerous dance. One misstep could destroy everything, but every calculated move gave her a slight edge. From the civilian aircraft below, the passengers could only stare in awe and terror. Though unaware of the full scale of the threat, they felt the tension in the air, the raw power and precision of the woman protecting them. Emma's calm composure amidst chaos gave them a fragile sense of hope, fragile, but real. Then came the critical moment. The anomaly surged upward, faster than ever, aiming directly at her raptor. Emma's mind processed its trajectory instantly. She executed a series of maneuvers so precise, so perfectly timed, that it appeared almost supernatural. The blip reacted, twisted, and swerved, narrowly missing her craft. Sparks of tension seemed to rain across the sky as the F-22 pilots cheered in disbelief over the comms. Shadow finally said, voice shaking with awe, She's a ghost in the sky. No one else could have done that." Emma's jaw tightened. She didn't acknowledge the praise. Her eyes scanned the horizon, radar locked on the anomaly. She understood something critical. This was not over. The object had been testing her, gauging her limits, and it had learned, it had adapted. Her fingers tightened on the controls. She whispered under her breath, a promise to herself, to the passengers, to everyone watching. "Not today, not on my watch." The blip surged again, its trajectory sharper, faster, and more aggressive than before. Emma adjusted, calculating a split-second evasive maneuver, countering with precision that left even Shadow and the other pilots speechless. And as the civilian aircraft remained safe on the plateau below, Emma realized the truth. Her hidden history, her Top Gun-level training, was no longer just a secret. It was the only thing standing between chaos and survival. But the anomaly, faster and smarter than anything she had ever faced, was not finished. It surged again, closing in with terrifying intent, leaving the F-22 pilots and the passengers below holding their breath. Emma gritted her teeth, eyes narrowing, and whispered, "Then it's time you learn who you're up against." The sky seemed to tense, the winds howling louder, the valley echoing with the unspoken warning. The final test had begun. The wind howled through the jagged mountain peaks, a violent orchestra of chaos that seemed to echo the panic still lingering among the passengers on the plateau below. Major Emma Hawk, Sinclair's F-22 cut through the sky like a silver predator, her eyes locked on the anomaly that had been stalking them since the first shudder of the civilian plane. It was faster than anything conventional, smarter than any machine she had ever encountered, and it moved with deliberate intelligence, anticipating her maneuvers as if it knew her mind. From above, the F-22 squadron maintained a tight formation, awed and terrified. Shadow's voice cracked over the comms. "Emma, that thing, it's not just testing you. It's trying to force a mistake. Nobody else could survive this." Emma's jaw set. "Then I won't make one." She banked sharply, the Raptor tilting at an impossible angle, dodging a rapid surge from the anomaly. Sparks of tension seemed to explode in the air as the blip twisted and darted, attempting to anticipate her next move. Her hands moved almost independently of her thoughts, each adjustment to throttle, rudder, and control surfaces calculated to keep her ahead. She had trained for these moments in simulators and extreme flight exercises, scenarios where every millisecond counted. But nothing in her history, not dogfights, not emergency landings, not the countless hours of covert high-intensity aerial drills, could have fully prepared her for this. The anomaly surged again, faster than before, zigzagging unpredictably. Emma executed a series of evasive maneuvers so precise, so high-risk, that the F-22 pilots above could barely comprehend them. Shadow's voice was almost a whisper. She's rewriting the rules of aerial combat in real time. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, instinct, and training. She realized the blip was learning, adapting to her style, her timing, her reactions. It wasn't just a threat. It was a dynamic puzzle, a mirror of her skill, and she had only one chance to outsmart it. She banked sharply, spiraling downward toward the valley, using the terrain to her advantage. Rocks loomed below like jagged teeth, but Emma twisted, flipped, and rolled, forcing the anomaly to follow a path it wasn't designed to navigate. Sparks of fear and adrenaline collided inside her chest as she guided the craft with surgical precision. From the plateau below, the passengers watched in disbelief. They couldn't see the full scope of the aerial battle, but they felt it, a tension in the air, a palpable intensity that gripped their hearts. Emma was their invisible shield, the unseen guardian who had saved them once and was now preparing to do it again. Shadow's voice returned, awe thick in his tone. "Emma, do you realize what you're doing? You're not just fighting for the passengers, you're fighting a threat that nobody alive has faced, and you're winning." Emma didn't answer. She had no time for words. Every move, every maneuver, every calculation mattered. She spotted an opportunity. The blip had a momentary blind spot, a gap in its trajectory, an angle it couldn't anticipate immediately. She adjusted her throttle, banking sharply, and dived through the opening. The anomaly reacted, but not quickly enough. Emma twisted, climbed, and then executed a split-second roll, gaining position above it. Her pulse raced, but her control was absolute. The blip hesitated for the first time, its erratic movements stuttering, recalculating. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She had studied enemy patterns in simulations for years, but this was no simulation. This was life, death, and the preservation of dozens of lives below, and she had to win. Emma's hands flew over the controls, initiating a high-speed intercept maneuver, a combination of vertical climbs, rapid rolls, and sudden dives that forced the blip to respond defensively. Her movements were textbook-perfect Top Gun, applied in a real-world crisis with stakes higher than any simulation. The F-22 pilots above could barely follow her. Shadow gasped. She's a ghost in the sky. No one could do this." Emma's eyes flicked to the plateau below. The civilian plane remained stable, smoke curling faintly from the engine, passengers trembling but alive. That was her anchor. That was her focus. No matter the danger above, she would protect them. The anomaly surged again, closing in faster, zigzagging with intelligence that mirrored her own. But Emma had anticipated this. She banked sharply, descending through the valley with incredible precision, and the blip followed, too predictable now, reacting to patterns she had deliberately laid out. With a swift, decisive movement, she twisted the Raptor into a vertical climb, forcing the anomaly to overshoot. In a split second, she rolled and dove, gaining position above it. Sparks seemed to ignite in the sky as the F-22 pilots watched the impossible unfold. Emma's lips curved into a small, grim smile. She understood now. This wasn't just a test of skill. It was a test of instinct, timing, and the ability to remain calm under unimaginable pressure. And she was more than capable. The anomaly hesitated again, its movements erratic. It had adapted, yes, but Emma's maneuvers were unpredictable, almost human in their creativity. It couldn't anticipate her next action, couldn't calculate the human ingenuity at play. She executed a final maneuver, a combination of a high-speed roll, sudden climb, and lateral thrust adjustment that positioned her directly behind the blip. For the first time, she had a perfect intercept angle. From the F-22s above, Shadow's voice trembled. She's about to make contact. Emma, what are you doing?" Emma's gaze hardened. "What needs to be done?" she murmured. With surgical precision, she initiated the intercept, using her Raptor's speed and agility to match the blip's movements. The unknown object reacted violently, attempting to evade, but it was too late. Emma anticipated every move, calculated every vector, and in a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity, she neutralized the threat, not by brute force, but by outmaneuvering it entirely. The anomaly spiraled, erratic, and then, in a sudden flash, it vanished from the radar. Silence fell across the mountain pass. The wind still howled, but the tension that had gripped the valley for over an hour seemed to dissipate slightly. The F-22 pilots hovered in stunned disbelief. Shadow's voice was barely audible, choked with awe. She did it. She actually did it." Emma exhaled sharply, muscles relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. The civilian plane remained safe on the plateau, passengers trembling but alive. She looked down at them, allowing a small, reassuring smile. Her mind replayed the battle in rapid succession. Every evasive maneuver, every calculated risk, every split-second decision. The Top Gun-level training she had hidden from the world had not just saved lives. It had prevented a disaster that could have rewritten history. But even as relief washed over her, she knew one truth. The world had just glimpsed her skill, and that revelation would not remain secret for long. The F-22 pilots above were already exchanging awed and whispered conversations, the word of her abilities spreading faster than any broadcast could manage. Emma's lips pressed into a thin line as she guided her Raptor back toward the civilian plane. Sparks from her own maneuvers still trailed in the air, but she had succeeded. She had protected the lives below, outmaneuvered a threat faster and smarter than anything known to man, and demonstrated the lethal precision of her hidden Top Gun history. And yet somewhere deep inside she knew, this was only the beginning. The wind over the plateau had finally calmed, leaving a tense, uneasy silence in its wake. The civilian plane sat on the rocky strip like a miracle frozen in time. Inside, passengers were trembling, shaken to the core but alive. Some clutched each other, sobbing quietly. Some stared out the windows, eyes wide, still struggling to comprehend the impossible chain of events that had just saved them from certain death. And hovering above them, the F-22 pilots watched in awe, the gravity of what they had witnessed slowly sinking in. Major Emma Hawk Sinclair descended from the cockpit of her Raptor, steps measured, purposeful, yet carrying the exhaustion that only someone who had pushed themselves to the absolute limits of human capability could feel. Her uniform was streaked with sweat, smudged with dirt and scorch marks from the sparking fuselage, and the faint scent of smoke clung to her. Her hair, damp and clinging to her neck, did nothing to diminish the presence of a woman who had just performed the impossible. The passengers, still shaking, slowly began to approach. One by one, hesitant, they extended trembling hands, offering thanks and murmuring prayers. Emma's lips curled into a faint, reassuring smile. "You're safe," she said softly, almost a whisper but full of authority. "All of you, you made it." Tears streamed down the faces of the young mother clutching her baby, the elderly couple holding hands, the teenager who had whispered he thought they would die. Emma met each gaze with a steady, calming presence that anchored the chaos still lingering in their hearts. But above them, the F-22 pilots were still processing what they had witnessed. Shadow finally broke the silence, voice choked with awe. "Emma, do you realize what you've just done? That blip, that object, nobody else could have survived that, let alone neutralized it." Emma's gaze flicked upward, toward where the blip had vanished into the clouds. "It was never about me," she said quietly. "It was about the people on that plane. Every life matters." The other pilots exchanged glances, a mixture of reverence and disbelief. One finally asked, voice shaking, "Emma, you weren't just flying like anyone else. You were Top Gun level, better than anything I've ever seen. Where did you learn to do this?" Emma's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing slightly. Her secret training had always been hidden, compartmentalized, classified at the highest levels. No one outside her elite instructors had ever seen the full depth of her skills. She had survived impossible scenarios, excelled in extreme simulations, and learned maneuvers that even seasoned F-22 pilots struggled to comprehend. Until now, no one had witnessed it in action, and certainly not under circumstances this dangerous. For a moment, she allowed herself a flicker of pride, tempered by the weight of responsibility she carried. Every maneuver, every decision, every risk she had taken had been calculated with one thought in mind: preserving life. And today, she had succeeded against all odds. One of the passengers, an elderly man with trembling hands, stepped forward and said softly, voice breaking, I don't know how to thank you. You saved us all. If it weren't for you," his words trailed off as tears choked him. Emma placed a hand on his shoulder gently. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "Just live, that's enough." Behind her, the co-pilot, still pale and shaking, finally found his voice. I couldn't have done any of that without you. You're not just a pilot. You're." Emma shook her head, cutting him off softly. "We all have a role. I just happened to be the one up there today, but don't sell yourself short. You kept us alive, too." The F-22 pilots, meanwhile, began relaying the footage and data from their instruments. Every maneuver, every calculation, every split-second decision Emma had executed had been recorded, and the analysis left them speechless. She had outmaneuvered a threat that defied all conventional logic, demonstrating precision and skill at levels that few could ever hope to reach. Shadow muttered, almost to himself, She's not just trained. She's a living legend." Emma glanced at him, expression unreadable. "Legends aren't made in safety. They're made in moments like this," she replied quietly. The crowd of passengers, slowly recovering from their shock, began murmuring among themselves. They didn't know the details of her training or the near-impossible scenario she had just navigated, but they knew instinctively that this was no ordinary pilot. One woman whispered, voice trembling, she's a hero. Another man, tears still in his eyes, added, no, she's something more than a hero. She's incredible. I've never seen anyone like her in my life. Emma's lips curved faintly in acknowledgement, but she didn't linger on praise. Her eyes shifted to the horizon, scanning for any sign of the anomaly. It had disappeared, but she knew instinctively that the world had changed. Whatever had been testing her, observing her, and pushing her limits was out there somewhere, and her skills, once hidden, were now fully revealed to anyone paying attention. Shadow stepped closer, voice quieter now, filled with reverence. Emma, the Air Force, the world, they need to know who you are. They need to understand what you just did. Emma shook her head, a shadow of her usual calm determination crossing her face. Some things are meant to stay secret, she said. I've always believed that. Today wasn't about me. It was about saving lives. That's all that matters. But even as she spoke, she understood the truth. Her Top Gun-level history was no longer a secret. The footage, the telemetry, the reports from the F-22 pilots, all of it would surface. The world would see, perhaps for the first time, the skill, courage, and precision that had always been her hidden advantage. And there would be consequences. The passengers, now gathering themselves, began moving toward emergency personnel who had arrived on the plateau. Some lingered, staring up at Emma, as if hoping to imprint the memory of the woman who had saved their lives into their minds forever. Children clung to parents, whispering about the lady pilot who had somehow danced with danger and lived. Emma allowed herself a single breath of relief. The plane was safe, the passengers were alive, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. But deep down, she knew the moment was fleeting. There would always be new challenges, new threats, and new responsibilities. Today she had survived the impossible, but tomorrow the sky would demand even more. Shadow finally spoke again, voice hushed with awe and respect. Emma, I've seen the best of the best. I've flown against incredible pilots, but what you just did, you've redefined what it means to be elite. You're a legend, and the world deserves to know it. Emma's eyes softened slightly, her jaw still set with determination. Legends aren't made for recognition, she said. They're made to protect, to survive, to save lives. That's why I fly. And with that, she turned back toward her Raptor, checking systems, scanning the horizon, prepared for whatever the world might throw at her next. She had revealed her true capabilities, saved countless lives, and proven that even in the face of impossible odds, skill, courage, and determination could rewrite the rules of survival. The F-22 pilots watched her with awe, the passengers now whispering tales of the woman who had turned a catastrophe into a miracle. Across the plateau, cameras and instruments had captured every moment, ensuring that the story of Emma Sinclair, the Top Gun-trained pilot who had saved everyone on board, would spread, inspiring awe, respect, and disbelief across the nation. And as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting golden light over the rocky plateau, Emma stood tall, gaze fixed on the horizon, a living testament to courage, skill, and the quiet, relentless power of a true legend. Because sometimes, heroes are forged not in recognition, but in the moments when the world itself seems determined to tear them apart. And Emma Sinclair had just proven that even against the impossible, one person could make a difference. The sky had become her battlefield, and she had won.